Hello and welcome to Frankly Speaking, where we dive deep into regional headlines and speak with leading policymakers and business leaders. I am Katie Jensen. On this episode, we hear from Michael Ratney, the US ambassador to Saudi Arabia. Will a historic security deal between the US and Saudi be announced within weeks? Or is the pact impossible without Israel agreeing to Palestinian statehood? Plus, will the US exert more pressure on Israel to end the atrocities in Gaza? We'll also explore the profound transformation he's witnessed in Saudi Arabia and new areas of cooperation between the two nations. Ambassador, thank you for joining us today on Frankly Speaking. Now, you have just completed 1 year as the US ambassador to Saudi Arabia. There's no doubt this year has been marked by massive developments in US-Saudi relations. Now, we began with a very hostile tone at the beginning of the current US administration. Now we've seen a lot of cooperation and there's talks of a very imminent security pact coming soon. Frankly speaking, is the all-time low in the relationship now behind us? And what would you say was the real turning point in that?
Yeah, so it's a good question. Let me just say, this has been a long-standing relationship. It's over 80 years of this US-Saudi partnership. And I'm reminded of that every day that I come into the office because along one of our walls are photos of every US president since Franklin Delano Roosevelt and every Saudi king since Abdulaziz. And you really get a sense of the longevity of this relationship. Have there been ups and downs? Safe to say there have been. I think that's probably pretty normal, especially in a relationship that goes back as long as the US-Saudi relationship does. I will tell you, as you point out, I got to this country just over a year ago. And when I got here, I felt that the relationship was in a very good place. And I felt it. I felt it in my interactions with the Saudi leadership. I felt it in my interactions with Saudi government officials and the business community and with ordinary Saudi citizens that I had the opportunity to meet. So I have been gratified that relationship, by the time I got here at least, felt like it was in a very good place. And in the year since I've been here, I think it's only gotten better for a whole range of reasons. Our discussions over a security agreement perhaps are one of them, but the fact is that our partnership is expanding in a whole number of different ways that were probably inconceivable 5 or 10 years ago.
Let's talk a little bit about that security pact we mentioned just a moment ago. Now, just a few days ago, Secretary Blinken said we could be just weeks away from signing what would truly be a historic deal. Ambassador, do we have a specific date in mind for this agreement?
No, I don't think we have a specific date. It's also worth keeping in mind that what people refer to as the deal is actually a collection of negotiations that we've been undertaking for over a year, really since before I even started as U.S. ambassador, that touch on multiple areas of the U.S.-Saudi partnership. The one we read about most recently and the reports that you refer to came about after our National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, visited the kingdom just a couple of weeks ago and had extremely productive meetings with His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince. That focused on an important element of the negotiations that we've been undertaking, the nature of that U.S.-Saudi strategic partnership. As you might have seen from the statements that were put out, we're very close to agreement on that. But there are other elements to this. Besides the strategic and the military elements, there's economic components. And of course, as Secretary Blinken made clear in comments that he made just a few days ago, there's a Palestinian component to this as well. If you recall, part of this agreement is about the security relationship between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, but part of it is about establishing normal relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. We tend to overuse that word historic, but I think taken as a whole, this package of agreements would be truly historic. But as part of that, there's a role for the Palestinians. And so the Saudis have made clear that that's a requirement of theirs, and we as well have our expectations. The Gaza conflict has only reinforced the urgency of that as as part of this whole arrangement, there has to be a path forward for statehood for the Palestinians.
Okay, Ambassador, and I want to ask you about the Palestinian side in just a moment. But first, tell me about the date. You say we don't have a specific date in mind, but what about a timeline? We're looking at 1 month, 2 months?
So I don't think there's anybody involved in these negotiations that wouldn't like to have it finished tomorrow. You know, as I said a moment ago, we overuse that word historic, but it would be a historic agreement, and it could fundamentally change the landscape in the Middle East for the better. Political cooperation, security cooperation, economic integration. But since all of that is a part of this agreement, and these are extraordinarily complex and detailed discussions, I don't think I could put a timeline for it. There's also other elements of it, including a U.S. Senate role, and obviously the situation in Israel weighs on this as well. So as much as we would like to get this done tomorrow, we are going to proceed as quickly as we can, as seriously as we can, and we're going to get this done as soon as all of the pieces fall into place.
Ambassador, there's a few things to unpack here, and I want to speak to you about the Palestinian statehood and about Gaza in just a moment. But first, what can you tell us about the particulars of this deal? Because my understanding is that there has always been a security agreement between the US and Saudi. Now, what this will do effectively is put on paper in very clear terms to prevent it from being politicized in the future. So, is my understanding correct? And if so, how would it be safeguarded from politicization in the future?
Sure, it's designed to be exactly that, and that's why it's an agreement that would involve U.S. Senate ratification. U.S. Senate ratification means it is a formal agreement that doesn't depend on a particular administration. It's an enduring, or would be an enduring agreement, not between an administration or a government, but between two countries. And in that brings certainty. It brings certainty to us. It would bring certainty to the Saudis as well.
Okay, so should we expect something like the US-Japan security arrangement?
Yeah, I'm really reluctant to get into those sorts of details. Those are exactly the kinds of things that are subject to negotiations at the highest level of our government and the highest level of the Saudi government. But I think let's just say this would be a historic agreement that would upgrade the security partnership between the United States and Saudi Arabia. It would upgrade the economic relationship. It would bring Israel and Saudi Arabia essentially into the same region. And it would bring benefits and a path to statehood for the Palestinians. So that's a lot. It's a complex set of discussions, and I'm really reluctant to get into the details of things that some of which are still yet to be negotiated.
Okay, well, let's move on to the atrocities in Gaza. Now, Saudi has made it very clear on multiple occasions that it will not consider normalizing ties with Israel unless it calms down on its offensive and really commits to an irreversible path to a Palestinian state. Now, frankly speaking, once again, that just doesn't seem possible with the current extremist right-wing government in Israel today, unless more pressure is placed by the US. Wouldn't you agree?
So I think the value of this agreement, all of the parts of it that we've just talked about, whether it's the security partnership between the U.S. and Saudi, an economic relationship, or the elements that would involve the Palestinians, as you say, and the Saudis have made clear, calm in Gaza and a credible pathway to Palestinian statehood, all of those have value, all of those are important. Some of those are just more difficult than others. The fact that all of those things are difficult, and some more difficult than others, including obviously the issue of Palestinian statehood and the status of the war in Gaza right now, are particularly complex. It doesn't in any way diminish the value of pursuing this agreement and ensuring that it's there when all of the parties are ready to embrace it.
Sure, and while there's been major meetings with Secretary Blinken as well as Jake Sullivan, there really seems like there's no signs that the Israeli leaders are moving to join them. So is the US-Saudi pact really dependent on the Israeli aspect? And if it is, why should it be? Because at the end of the day, wouldn't it be in America's interest anyway to be able to safeguard global energy supplies or create jobs for Americans while also helping a partner go through a remarkable transformation?
I would say all the elements that we have discussed are of extraordinary value. The real value is taking it all together. All of those elements that have been under discussion, all of the U.S.-Saudi pieces, and the Israel and the Palestinian pieces, taken together, could fundamentally change the landscape of this Middle East. So, and that is the lens through which we see it, and it's certainly the lens through which the U.S. Senate sees it, and they ultimately would have a vote to ratify it.
Well, Ambassador, you are no stranger to this region. I'm sure you can appreciate the kinds of emotions that are stirred up when your country continues to arm Israel, when America is the only one that vetoes ceasefires multiple times and the creation of a Palestinian state. I have to wonder, aren't decision makers back in Washington worried that these kinds of actions are only going to radicalize more Arab and Muslim youth and create Hamas 2.0?
So recall, I sit here in Riyadh. I'm the U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia, and my preoccupation is what's happening here in the U.S.-Saudi partnership. I will tell you, I've spent over 30 years as a diplomat in the Middle East, and a lot of that is focused on just these issues. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, our involvement in it, our efforts to find a resolution to it. These are people that I know personally, among Israelis and among Palestinians. It's impossible for anyone who watches these scenes on a daily basis, and it's certainly impossible for anyone that knows friends and family who have been engulfed in this conflict not to be moved by it and not to be motivated to find a solution as soon as possible, to find an end to the violence in Gaza, to find an end to the threats to Israeli security, to find a path to statehood so that this sort of, for Palestinians, to ensure that this sort of conflict doesn't resume. The diplomacy involved with that is extraordinarily complex. And there's areas that we pursue and there's positions that we take that sometimes aren't popular, but they're based on our sense of the most expeditious, the most effective way of pursuing it. Sometimes we have disagreements, but I will tell you, we work with our partners in the region, with our Saudi partners here on a very steady basis and throughout this entire region. And we might not always agree on every step of the way, but we certainly agree on the end state.
But Ambassador, putting the Saudi deal aside, shouldn't the US be putting more pressure on Israel? The whole world can't be wrong. Your closest allies in this region are all advising you to put more pressure on.
I think it's safe to say that both President Biden, Secretary Blinken, all of our senior officials have been heavily involved. This has been a major preoccupation of theirs since the outbreak of violence on October 7th. They have been in the region steadily. Secretary Blinken has been here 6 times since October 7th, our national security advisor as well, in almost every case that involves visits to Israel as well, where they have sometimes very difficult and very direct conversations. We have an important relationship with Israel. We have an important partnership with Israel, and we utilize that relationship and partnership to find a decent end to this conflict.
It just feels like the US should be exerting more pressure. We've heard them call for restraint, but we've also seen Israel plow ahead with the Rafah offensive. We've seen that awful tent massacre this week, 45 people killed, many women and children. Those awful videos of children have been beheaded and burnt in their sleep, where civilians should be safe to be able to shelter. It's absolutely horrifying. But let's move on. Let's talk a little bit more about your role in the kingdom. We mentioned earlier you've been based in the kingdom for a year now. So tell me, how would you describe the transformation that Saudi Arabia is going through? And tell me about some of the changes that you've witnessed personally during your time there.
I think the first time I came to the kingdom was about 10 years ago, and I visited on and off over the last 10 years. But I have to say, when I got off the plane just a year ago in Riyadh in April of last year, it felt to me like a very different place. Now, some of that was that it felt physically different. Certainly there's a lot more construction and activity going on here. But the real changes I found are the intangible ones. It's the sense of optimism and energy and forward-looking innovation that I see among young Saudis, pardon me. It's the role of women in society here, which is really unprecedented. Women in the workplace, women's role in society that goes well beyond the view in the United States that the big innovation was women driving. When you come here, you see that women driving was really the tip of the iceberg. And in fact, that transformation, bringing half the population fully into the workforce, is extraordinary. And then finally, this was an economy and this was a relationship that was long based on energy, on oil, and on security. And I come here a year ago and I see that the relationship is vastly more diverse than that. It's built on high technology. It's built on educational exchange. It's built on areas that we never imagined. I personally never imagined 10 years ago would be at the center of a U.S.-Saudi partnership, including green energy, film and television production, space exploration. So it's been an extraordinary year, and this year has been a great window not only into the transformation taking place inside this country, but also into the enormous opportunities that represents for the U.S.-Saudi relationship.
And with so many changes underway, I think in many respects, sometimes the women driving almost overshadows the other changes we've seen. So tell me about your impressions from dealing with the kingdom's leadership, and what are your thoughts on the quality of the government officials and the civil servants that you often meet with there?
Yeah, I mean, what you said is absolutely right. Women driving is really the tip of the iceberg. The big change, the big innovation, and it has fundamentally changed the face of this country, is the fact that women are involved in every aspect of the economy and every aspect of society. And that's as simple as me going into meetings with senior government officials and seeing women are full participants in these discussions. And they're not there as symbols. They're highly educated, in many cases as well educated or better educated than their male counterparts, often at U.S. universities. And it's an extraordinary thing to see. Besides the fact that it's the right thing to do, obviously for a country with this sort of economic ambition, excluding half of your population from involvement in the economy, you're never going to reach those targets. Bringing that half of the population, particularly an ambitious, hardworking, well-educated group of women, into the economy and into society means that the ambitions that Saudi has are much more likely to be realized.
And it's certainly been an important relationship for some time. We know the US is Saudi Arabia's largest trading partner. Saudi is also the largest US export market in the Middle East. So where would you say the biggest opportunities lie for American businesses today? Particularly, we've seen these huge giga projects take off. We've seen big changes in aviation, defense, aerospace, telecoms. Where are the biggest opportunities today?
In a multitude of areas. You know, U.S. business has been here as long as there's been a Saudi Arabia. Obviously, at the beginning, most of that was in the energy sector. The real transformation, the real diversification of opportunities for U.S. business has come with Vision 2030 and with all of the efforts here to diversify the economy. So it's hard to pinpoint just one, but I will say, and we work heavily with U.S. companies that become intrigued by this market, to export to this market, to partner with Saudis here and invest here. And we see it in areas like not just healthcare, but infrastructure. Obviously, this country is making huge investments in infrastructure, and U.S. companies bring real value there. In high tech, Saudi Arabia has ambitions to become a hub for innovation and technological development. That, in many ways, is a U.S. brand. And so U.S. companies, whether Amazon or Google or others, are here, are interested, are involved, and are becoming partners with Saudis in those efforts. In the past, there was never much of a film industry here. Now we see U.S. film and television companies interested in partnering with Saudi's nascent film industry. That's just extraordinary as well. So across the whole economy, we see opportunities for the U.S. And obviously, as you can imagine, I'm kind of biased. I think it's American companies that bring innovation, they bring value, and I think they're the best bet as Saudi Arabia thinks about its economic future.
Okay, well, let me pick up on what you just said a moment ago when it comes to technology, because this is one of the interesting things about the security deal we mentioned earlier. When it comes to technology, it seems like many American companies are missing out, particularly in terms of tech and communications deals. And then when the kingdom opts for Chinese alternatives, it's often criticized by US lawmakers. So doesn't it seem unreasonable, in your opinion, to leave a vacuum and then complain when a competitor fills it up?
So interesting point you raise. I would say a couple of things. One is that I attended a show here a couple of months ago called LEAP. It's a big tech show. It's actually become probably one of the largest tech shows in the world. And it's the second or third time that it was held in Riyadh. U.S. companies were everywhere. U.S. companies were the largest exhibitors, the largest participants, and a few multi-billion-dollar deals were signed. It was a big deal, and it was clear that U.S. companies not only want to be in this market, but are in this market. Are there competitors, Europeans, Chinese? Sure, some of them were there as well. But I have to say, where China might bring low price to the table, what the U.S. brings is value, and it brings innovation, and it brings partnership in a way that very few competitors can match.
Well, let's talk more about space exploration. That is a huge area of mutual interest and cooperation. Of course, we saw a space deal signed between the two nations in late 2023. We've seen Saudi merging the air and space forces with the US help. Tell me more about this cooperation and what are you trying to achieve in helping Saudi achieve some of their ambitious goals here?
Sure. When President Biden visited here not quite 2 years ago, the Saudis had signed the Artemis Accords, which is an international understanding and agreement that leads to cooperation with the United States on returning to the moon and other aspects of manned space exploration. It was clear that Saudi Arabia had ambitions in that area. And to listen to the Saudi leadership talk about it, I think quite rightly, a space sector, a commercial space sector, is becoming increasingly a normal part of any big, healthy economy. It's great for us. That is kind of America's brand. We have a great number of U.S. companies in the commercial space sector that are here, that are partnering with Saudi Arabia. It was Axiom Space, a U.S. company that put 2 Saudi astronauts last year to the International Space Station, an Air Force pilot and a microbiologist. The Saudis clearly have further ambitions there as well, and we want to be a part of that. The administrator of NASA, Bill Nelson, was just here a couple of weeks ago, cementing that government-to-government relationship and also paving the way for expanded partnership in a whole range of areas. Space, commercial space in particular, is the future, and it's an extraordinarily lucrative and extraordinarily ambitious future.
Certainly some huge opportunities in that arena. Now, final question for you today. You have certainly been appointed in a historical time in the bilateral relationship between both nations. So looking forward, what would you like your legacy to be or to contribute to this relationship?
So, I mentioned that when I got here a little over a year ago, the relationship felt like it was in a good place. And I do think that's the case. And I think over the last year, it has gotten better and better as our partnership has diversified, as we've delved into negotiations over a potential historical agreement between our countries. So if I look ahead a year, 2 years, 3 years, what I'd like is that trajectory and the speed of that diversification and partnership to continue. As Saudi's ambitions expand, whether it's expanding and reforming their educational sector, building a larger media sector, the space exploration that we talked about, building a high-tech industry, a whole range of areas where the U.S. and Saudi are natural partners, I would like to see a few years from that for everybody to know about that and for Saudi to be succeeding in its ambitions and for the U.S. to be seen as its #1 partner as it does so.
Well, certainly some big regional challenges underway in the meantime. Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us today and sharing those insights with us. And we look forward to hearing more about this imminent security deal, whether it will unfold in the coming weeks or months. But thank you for your time today.
Sure. Great talking to you.